Welcome to the first episode of our news and review podcast. I'm joined by TJ. Hi, TJ.
Hello.
And today we'll be discussing COVID-19 coronavirus outbreak and the Black Lives Matter movement and protests. These are two major debates and both global events right now. So let me start off by asking you, TJ, how are you doing in these times?
I'm doing all right. I feel my sanity wavering here and there just from the isolation, but it feels like I'm starting to get back into like the swing of things, and things are starting to normalize.
I completely understand. My insanity is also, pretty up there.
Yeah.
So, what do you think about coronavirus across the world? How do you think the world's handling it?
The world, I feel, is it's very interesting because it's like parts of the world are doing very well, and then other parts just seem to have like the surgence rates, and it's just like we're like so close, we're almost there to like kind of like stopping the spread, but like there's always like small pockets that kind of like kick it up again.
Understandable. I definitely agree. I think a lot of the countries around the world have actually dealt with coronavirus well. I think New Zealand is a good example. There was a time for a few weeks where they claimed they had under 5 cases total. Or at least they had potentially no cases as a claim. They've eliminated coronavirus. Obviously, they reopened and that has caused a resurgence of a few cases, and I have to recheck their current status, but some countries have definitely handled it well. Would you say the U.S. has handled it well?
It's funny because it's the same kind of opinion worldwide. It's like parts of the U.S. did like great. They did whatever they needed to do, and they started to flatten the curve, as they say. But there's definitely other parts of the U.S. that kind of, I guess, rebelled against the idea of like coronavirus. I was hearing talk of like a lot of like conspiracy that like corona wasn't like a thing, and like it scared me during like while we were like waiting to see what would happen with all these protesters and all these different events that like people were just not being cooperative, like so like there's definitely areas that like really got hit bad, and when they refused to like follow through with like what everyone was like assuming was protocol, I mean like they're just like damaging themselves, and it hurts to watch it,
I definitely understand. First, I mean, to address the conspiracies out there, coronavirus is real. It's a fast spreading and generally very contagious virus. There's a few precautions that you should be taking, and I'm sure TJ agrees with me here, like keeping at least 6 feet or 2 meters distance, wearing a face mask without, major holes in it, keeping potentially gloves or at least sanitizing your hands often, as well as not touching your eyes, face, nose, mouth, with potentially contaminated hands. So in the U.S., there's definitely been a lot of surgence of I want to say protesting the virus, as you mentioned, where a lot of people who disagree with the virus have decided that it's not pertinent to them, or they don't think that it's worth them having to be forced to stay inside. I'm sure everyone remembers the specific congressional or council hearing in a specific state where certain individuals were proclaiming their, say, patriotism or their right to not wear masks by invoking God, or by using analogies like if we're not forced to wear underwear, essentially, if wear wearing the mask is like wearing underwear for that woman who doesn't wear underwear. But moving on, it seems that there's a huge population in America that doesn't believe in the virus and will continue to go outside and not social distance, not including just those individuals. I would say even the younger generation who's more fearless. Would you agree?
I do agree that some of the younger generations are fearless. I didn't look too much into it, but they're doing the coronavirus parties, right? And they're like doing payouts to people who sit there that, yeah, and catch the virus, which is like a bonkers statement. Like, why are you doing that? It's like absolutely, and like the people at the bars, like New Jersey was like getting ready to reopen, and then like basically we saw that like people weren't taking it seriously, and even though like New Jersey's kind of doing well with coronavirus, it's just like we keep like getting so close to like progress, and then like something just keeps happening. Like I think with the bars, like no one was wearing masks. Everyone was just like crammed together.
There were a few cases,
yeah, and like they really just like make this like a never ending thing, because it's like we keep getting progress, and then we keep setting ourselves back because we get too excited. Like, I get that like people want to go out, be free, do everything, and like go back to like their normal day-to-day lives and doing whatever they want to, but like as like a society, we can achieve that together. So True. Like if we do it together all at the same time, we can get back to normal. And two, it's just like why if like doctors are telling you that like it's not exactly for you to for this quarantine, right? Like it's not for the general population. It's more for people who are more susceptible to it. So it's like I get like if you don't care about your own existence and like you want to take the risk, I get that. Whatever. I get that feeling. But like this isn't something that like you're only affecting yourself.
I mean, so to address this, I definitely feel, and a lot of people have come out to agree with me. Experts have come out to agree with the statement or the idea that social media plays a big part in, say, misinformation or the campaigning of the idea that you don't need to wear face masks, or that the forcing of face masks on you is a communist idea. It's communist socialist idea, and there's an agenda behind it. The fact that there's claims, obvious claims. I mean, it might be justified claims that it might increase CO2 levels, or it might make it harder to breathe, at least for some people who truly have a hard time breathing. But I'm not sure, for what reason you'd want to go out in coronavirus times when you have a hard time breathing. Because if you do catch the coronavirus and you have a hard time breathing, then you are likely to be one of the cases, more or extreme cases anyway. But I would definitely say that perhaps there is a major role in our government, a lot of the times the statewide side as well, where they're reopening too early. New Jersey, like you said, is a prime example, where New Jersey was listed as a state that actually had coronavirus under control for about 4 weeks, until I think Governor Murphy decided to reopen some areas like bars, and eventually, I think literally the next 2 days after, New Jersey was listed as growing cases of coronavirus, not declining. And I think now we're at 15,000 some odd deaths, and over 177,000 cases in New Jersey alone. But other states like Florida, for example, there's, in fact, I would say a huge chunk of states who have completely ignored CDC guidelines and have not only reopened a lot of their places, they actually haven't mandated things like face masks. They haven't included that in their own regulations for businesses to reopen as well, and that's caused major stress on the system that has to handle COVID, like the hospital system, the worker system, the essential worker system. Where essential workers are getting infected, the hospitals can't handle the surge in cases. When you have hospitals obviously sitting at 90% capacity, primarily because of this, I mean, you have a massive problem, and people are dying because of it. So I definitely see your point where, caring for yourself is one thing, but when it's massively affecting other people, you should definitely take that into account.
Florida was especially bad. I recall hearing a lot, and the thing that bothers me so much about that is that like I might just be generalizing here, but Florida has a higher elderly population, right?
They do. Yeah.
That's the thing. When you retire, you
settle down in Florida. Yeah.
So it just boggles my mind that they fought it so hard when you could argue it with other places that don't have as much elderly population.
Right.
Kinda. I mean, I wouldn't, but I could kind of see it. But Florida in particular, where it's literally a state known for the elderly going and spending their time there, and you're not going to protect basically a majority of your population. I don't know. To me, I had some friends that lived in Florida, and it was very just disgusting.
Yeah.
Because I'd get the Florida news every week from them, and it's just I don't even understand what the fuss was. For this entire quarantine, I really just struggled to understand why people have a problem with it.
Yeah, I definitely agree. First, obviously, I want to mention that COVID-19 doesn't discriminate too much between the elderly. It's just that the elderly are more susceptible to the symptoms and the severe cases of COVID-19. But yes, I would imagine Florida would have a little bit more common sense and fear against this virus. But you have people demanding that they can get haircuts well before businesses are prepared to give haircuts. You have people demanding that they have their dentist shop open, which I kind of understand, but at the same time, you could kill your dentist. Schools are a huge thing right now. They want to reopen schools so badly because of the potential 4 months that we've started to miss out now. But I recall there was a case, I think it was a few days ago, maybe it was yesterday, where 3 teachers in Arizona held a class, and it was just reported that all 3 teachers got the coronavirus and one of them's dead because of it now.
My.
So it's a perpetual debate where we have to ask ourselves, how are we going to deal with these problems that COVID-19 has given us, like potentially getting haircuts, going to our dentist. having school without actually either being there in person or without having to deal with coronavirus as a major issue. So, I mean, let's talk about the U.S. for a bit. So, the U.S. I think on Thursday. Thursday. I think data from Johns Hopkins reported that there was like the highest number of cases reported so far at 63,000 just in the U.S. Now, you know, if we were at the point where we were truly, you know, flattening the curve, this wouldn't be the case. To me, it seems like a clear indicator that opening up too early is a mistake. But what do you think the new number of cases means? 63,000 as of Thursday in that one day.
In that one day, it is a sign that like coronavirus is still around, and I mean, it's such a weird concept to kind of like bring to think about, because it's like, as much as it is spreading, it's not like you're seeing people every day just coughing. Like, it's not like something that like every person sees, because it's not like densely popular. It's not like focused. I would say, since it's spread out throughout the entire states. And I mean, it is a concerning sign that 60,000 people caught corona. But I mean, it is, you do have to take in factor like just like how easily this virus spreads. I mean, like, theoretically, that across the entire United States, I feel like it is a large number, but it could have been worse. Could have been a lot worse, to be honest.
I mean, we're talking about 63,000 new cases just on Thursday.
Just on Thursday?
Just on Thursday.
Oh.
So like, there per state there was anywhere from like a few hundred to a few thousand. Florida was bad. But yeah, 63,000 across the U.S. just on Thursday. New cases. New cases.
That is kind of concerning. That is very concerning.
So I mean, one thing I think is a primary factor here is probably our handling of, you know, reopening places and reopening too early. But at the same time, I think a major factor that everyone seems to be ignoring is the fact that we are actually limiting testing still. Like, testing, although technically free, and it should be free, anywhere that tells you it's paid is lying to you, and you shouldn't get it from them. It's not as, you know, offered to everyone as it should be, if you really want to keep this virus under control. 63,000 is just of the tested cases. You know, 63,000 in that one day is just of the tested cases. I don't know how many cases we test, but in one testing facility that might go through a few hundred a day. I don't know how many testing facilities we have, but 63,000 in one day is a lot to test already, you know?
Yeah. That is so crazy. How I mean, like, as hard as like these testing facilities might work, I mean, like, just because of how this virus is, and some people being asymptomatic,
right,
and just like some people just kind of like brushing it off like nothing happened, and then you go to these severe cases. So like some people, that's including that could not be including the asymptomatic people, because they don't know that they have it. I mean, like, so like it's crazy that like that's only like kind of like a guesstimate.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of people are getting tested because they're asymptomatic and they don't know, as well as the spread of it is actually still a problem because they're asymptomatic.
That too, and just like you gotta think of like how hard it is on like a personal level. Cause I've literally heard stories of like people like kind of like shunning family members.
Mm-hmm.
When if they had like anything to do with it, like it's like a nurse, EMT, blah blah blah.
Right.
Any people who would come into direct contact, like it's created this like social barrier between people who don't have to face that and people who do, and it's kind of crazy though, because it's like there's the people who deny the virus and then just like kind of perpetuate its existence,
mm-hmm.
and then there's people who make the people fighting it feel like they don't have anything to fight for. You know what I mean?
I do. It a lot of the times, I'd imagine, there, especially early on during the virus, there was a huge debate over if you recall, during the protests of the virus, where people were saying we needed haircuts, we were going to protest out here in our cars. Nurses and doctors and nurses, hospital professionals, medical professionals were in the streets counter-protesting. They were the people on the front lines who've personally seen. Obviously, there weren't too many COVID-19 survivors out there to advocate this at the time, but the nurses and doctors have seen the tragic horrors of what COVID-19 can do to your system. And they were worried about these people. They were out there counter-protesting these people with their masks on, trying to tell them that, essentially what you're doing is putting a major risk for you. It doesn't make sense for them to protest something that is inherently going to kill them, or protest something that protest the stopping of something that will inherently kill them. And it was actually, medical professionals out there counter protesting, their outrageous claims. I don't think, a major case like coronavirus is something that you should protest when something as simple as going to the barbershop could kill you.
See, and the way I kind of look at it is that basically what they're doing is protesting a hurricane, right? Like, no one sat there and implemented coronavirus.
Right.
At least not that we know of. But
conspiracies would have otherwise, but go on.
Yeah, conspiracies would say otherwise, but this was just an act of nature,
mm-hmm.
right? And we understand the acts of nature. We see hurricanes all the time, and it's just crazy to see the polar opposite reaction,
right,
to basically the same type of event. People look at this as it's not something that naturally occurs. Disease isn't something that we'd face as a consistently growing population.
I mean, in this paranoid times, especially with people who have let's say a different worldview than people who share the truth, they would easily jump to the conclusions that would seem favorable to them sometimes, like conspiracies, like outrageous claims made by, say, our president, and we'll get more into that later. But yeah, it seems very easy for them.
Honestly, though, some of these conspiracies just seem so memey.
Yeah, it's possible.
It just feels like someone's out there and they're just going on some random forum and they're like, "Hey, guys, coronavirus is fake." And then they did it as a joke, and now
Grandpa saw it and told everyone at the dinner table.
Exactly, and it just was like a wildfire from there.
It's very possible. So just to move this discussion forward, I think it's prudent we talk a little bit about Trump. He one is our president, and two, personally, as well as again, a lot of experts have said, which I hate that saying now, just because the Trump administration keeps using things like a lot of experts when the reality is he doesn't use experts, but a lot of experts, medical experts, real experts, are putting his actions as a major catalyst in our handling of the coronavirus, whether it's depleting our supplies too early. There was a case where he sent millions of masks to China during when the coronavirus was breaking, but the U.S. World Health Organization, CDC, have both exclaimed, pretty much shouting out in their releases that this is a worldwide disease. It's a pandemic. It's growing, and it's going to come to America, and it's going to be a major problem here. After that, he sent millions of masks to China, and obviously there was reported deals and trade-offs, but the reality is we didn't have those masks anymore. There was, if you recall, there was a case of him pushing hydroxychloroquine, a malaria drug, experimental use for COVID-19. It's still widely used as in cases of severe COVID-19 for hospitals that don't have other options like remdesivir. But he was praising this drug as a miracle drug, even saying things like, "What do you have to lose? Just take it." He even said he was taking it, which didn't make sense to me because it's a drug that you take after you have the virus and not before, and he put himself on a week course before, which it seems outrageous. But our president has and still is, for pretty much the entirety of coronavirus, has been calling it or using it as an excuse to defend his position, attack the Democrats, attack specific individuals who are, who don't align with his political party, but because, they decide that they want to keep the health of their citizens, up and in check. Trump would be against keeping their health in check. Something as simple as wearing face masks and supporting the CDC and the World Health Organization, and increasing efforts to find a find a vaccine, to find better treatments. All of that can directly be linked to Trump and him shutting down programs, him making mandates that are unnecessary. For example, like reopening schools and reopening businesses. It has a direct major impact on the US, which has, I believe, over 133,000 deaths already, and over 3.2 million cases in the US of coronavirus, which is a fourth of the world's cases. You have to wonder, what major series of events over these last 4 or 5 months have led to this moment where we've come to have a fourth of the world's cases of coronavirus, and our mortality rate isn't much better.
It is crazy. I mean, like, as looking at like kind of the bigger picture here, I mean, like, based off of how this disease spreads and how easily transmitted it is, I mean, like, our living condition, because I'd imagine there's a trend between the more industrial nations where, like, apartments on top of each other are like a common occurrence. I mean, like, so, like, you gotta think, like, those nations are definitely going to get hit the hardest just because of how like the infrastructure is.
Right.
Literally, I mean, like you go, like I mean, like I'm in the suburbs, so I'm not like on top of someone. But I used to live in apartments, and like I had people literally like less than 6 feet above me, or well, not less than 6 feet, but like
thin walls, one apartment,
thin walls.
Same ventilations. Yeah.
Right. So like like places like here with like buildings like that, like disease is like bound to spread and cause. But I mean, a quarter of the entire world is still like a crazy statistic.
I don't think other countries realize, you know, how bad it could be in the United States. Obviously, they understand that, you know, we have a ridiculous number of cases, but if okay, well, I actually have to correct that. There are some countries that have this problem, but essentially having a leader in charge who is almost actively against doing things, the necessary things, like providing the right stimulus checks, making masks and gloves and sanitizer free, and providing it to businesses, for example, for generally making sure that, you know, hospitals have the ventilators they need. Like there's a range of steps that I would say the U.S. could have done in within a month of planning, and have actually planned for in 2018. But you know, Trump actually shut down the strategic committee that was meant to deal with this coronavirus. Like having a leader that's actively out there, you know, pushing for reopenings and no masks is a huge factor, you know. And I know there are some countries that have leaders out there that are still to this day trying to say hide the cases that they have. They're trying to like make sure that people aren't going to vote against him by, say, reopening early. But you know, a lot of the world is still able to go outside, is still able to keep their coronavirus cases under control, just because they have an effective government.
Well, I do agree that Donald Trump is a big problem with especially just because like he feeds into people's energies. So like when these little cases come up with like people being like, oh, which the CO2 thing kind of bothers me,
right?
Because like your body creates CO2. You understand that, like that's already in you, right? Like that.
Fair.
Increasing your CO2 isn't going to do anything to you.
Well,
you'd have to
increase it by a lot.
Yes. You have to have an intense shift with one human being themselves cannot create that much CO2.
I think that, like, obviously some people, the very small majority here that could face problems are people that have severe breathing problems to begin with.
No, I mean, I've been saying,
and even then,
at least just like on social media, especially, a lot of people who have these severe cases, I forget the device they use, but they can test how much like CO2 is in it, and like she tested her system before. She was like an extreme asthmatic, I believe, and she tested it before and after the mask, and there was virtually no change.
Right, and that's like my point in the end. Like, some people will definitely feel discomfort with the mask, but it will save your life.
Yeah, like it's they ended up trying it with like 3 different types of masks.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah. I mean, like, I don't know. I just don't understand how people come up with these theories and think that, like, it's just it's almost like it's propaganda.
It is actually a lot of it is. I still get a ton of Trump ads that tell me, you know, that the Democrats are trying to make wearing masks a mandate, and I'm just like, is that a bad thing, Trump? This is an ad he's running on Facebook to millions of people.
No, and he just, I just can't fathom how you can legitimately always choose the option that's going to cause civil unrest.
Yeah.
Just as a leader, I don't understand what it doesn't even seem like he gains anything from it, right? Because besides doing the trade deal with China for the mask, what is he really doing besides listening to himself be talked about?
Right. I don't think our system is set to handle it, but at the same time, we could have been with the right preparedness, with the right honesty and acknowledgement of your mistake, and the ability to change, which he's made it a change for the worse, I think, in a lot of the cases. Yeah, the U.S. is facing a major problem still. Cases are going up. It's not going down at 63 plus thousand on Thursday alone. Thursday as in July 9th, right?
Yes.
Yeah, July 9th. And I mean, I don't think the U.S. is still taking the steps they need to seriously deal with this issue. So one thing that this ends up bringing to light is the prison system, and dealing with coronavirus in a prison, where not only do the inmates not get the right amount of soap, much less hand sanitizers, or masks even. They're in enclosed spaces, and they enclose breathing areas and working areas. They have constantly contact with each other, and the U.S. prison system, since it's already been stressed and kind of effed up in a lot of ways, a lot of people are dying in the prison systems. I think in California, the San Quentin prison had 200 staff and 1,300 prisoners that had active cases, and already 6 inmates have died for coronavirus. And I think California's overall has released 10,000 inmates because of this.
Release them because they had coronavirus?
Because they didn't want the prison system to be infected with coronavirus, so they've released over 10,000 people already. And the prison system was overpacked to begin with, especially in California, where drug charges and a lot of very not trumped up charges, but charges that aren't violent and charges that aren't a threat to society. They released those people, and I think they're making an effort to release another 8,000 people, incarcerated people, by the end of August, which is good, but it's just California. There's 50 other 50 states that we got to deal with, that constantly imprison people, and putting someone into prison in this pandemic seems like a death sentence.
Oh, of course. Disease in prison particularly, is crazy, and something that's been around the entire time prison's been around.
Yeah.
I think the other big one besides coronavirus was Russian prisons had a bad tuberculosis.
Oh yeah.
Right. That's the cough, right?
Okay, sure. Yeah. I can understand what you're saying.
Severe
coughing, yeah.
Yeah. The respiratory infection
right.
that ends up has a decent fatality rate. But it just would run rampant just because, like, prisons were small and, like, people were, like, packed on top of each other. And, like, it is crazy that, we've known that this is something that happens to prisons, and we haven't, like, shifted our kind of, like, structure of what the prison building would be.
Right.
And I get that, like, the government doesn't want to really put in so much money to a system that's just there to correct individuals, but, like, it's kind of like a necessity if you want them to be corrected.
I think in my view, from what I've understood about the prison system, a lot of it is the private prison system where, prisons are a business and people get paid to have more people in prison, as well as, potentially cutting down costs to save money for themselves is something that's still running rampant. The public's view on prisons aren't that great. So, I mean, there's not a lot of advocacy for prison change, or at least not up until, a while recently, where it's started to actually come to light more, and there's been advocacy, but still, not enough. The government, I believe their initial idea was let private institutions handle it because they can probably do it better, or they offered to, and that's clearly not the way they should have gone when the system behind money and the lack of providing the necessities that prisons actually need has caused even more issues. And personally, I think the money that private prisons receive and utilize might actually be going overboard, to begin with. If a prison system was held properly, I don't think a private prison would have the issues that it's having now, where I think in I think at San Quentin in California, there was a specific inmate. I remember the video, but he specifically talked about how so the inmate snuck in a phone and started recording in the prison, and he showed, say, like, the amount of soap, or like what they're dealing with social distancing terms, and the conditions in the prison. And he knew that once the video goes out, he's doing it live. Once the video goes out, he'll get in trouble. He'll have time added. It's illegal to have a phone in the prison. But at the same time, the prisons, the governments behind the prisons, they're not telling the public what these people are dealing with. They got to the point where an inmate risked the rest of his life just to tell the truth that the authorities and the prison authorities were keeping quiet. And until that stigma of the public view behind changing the prisons, until the private prison industry changes, it needs to be a federal change to begin with, where we actually handle prisons properly right now, or they're all going to die. They're all going to get infected.
No, and that's the sad thing is that, like, it's, that's one thing that's, like, always, like, bothered me. Mm-hmm. Is that, like, there's this stigma, there's this view of, like, inmates, and particularly on the right side, on the rightist side, I should say, not the right side. Mm-hmm. Like, they think because they're criminals that they're not human beings anymore. And I get it. Like, some people, what they've done is irredeemable, but, like, a lot of people in the prison system aren't really like that.
Right.
Like, it's not like, not everyone that's there is a murderer, and not everyone that's there has caused some, like, unspeakable pain to someone. Like, some people are just there because they sat there And like you said before, happen to be selling drugs or whatever. They're not violent individuals. So it is that view is just like so. I don't know. It's toxic. Just so disgusting to me. Yeah.
I mean, obviously, I would also argue that it wouldn't even be okay in general to subject, say, murderers or even violent crimes people to COVID-19 in general, but obviously removing them from prison is an option, but obviously giving them the necessities to be able to live in these conditions at the very least is something that we should still be providing to prisons, even if the case was that we don't want to provide convicts or put extra money and time and effort, which is unfortunately an argument that some prisons have made, that it's not worth it, don't worry about it, they're not people. Like, these are people. They'll not only will they feel pain, it's a terrible way to die without a hospitalization. It's a terrible way to die anyway in a hospital with COVID-19. The extent of the symptoms are severely underreported.
I hear ranges from it feels like you're breathing through a wet sponge to things like it like you can't even like fall asleep because like every like other breath in you choke and wake yourself up, like and
it's horrible. It's horrible.
That's horrifying because like it's not even just like the virus itself. It slowly wears at like your psyche because like you're not getting sleep, you're not feeling right, and you just have to keep trucking on.
There's a lot of recorded evidence for changes in the brain before and after. There's a lot of like reports of extreme delirium and impossible how impossible it is to focus. There's massive amounts of blood clotting, and like obviously extreme respiratory system failure and respiratory problems, but it's beyond that. It's the inability to move, it's the inability to breathe, it's the inability to think, pain. People really underestimate how bad this virus can be, and actually is, for a majority of the people who have it, who have symptoms of it.
It's crazy. I mean, like, what was my point? There was like, there was so many videos of like just like nurses breaking down because they basically had to do like the old school military strike,
the triage.
Triage where you had to decide who was worth saving, and like for like an everyday individual, that's like a terrible choice you have to make. Like I couldn't imagine being in that situation, telling someone that their grandmother, their aunt, their uncle, whatever, just
can't be saved.
Like,
and a lot of the times, because just the reasoning being they don't have the time or resources to save them.
They just don't have the staff. They don't have the equipment, and it's just so crazy because it's like, and then like people turn against them.
Yeah.
Being like, oh, they didn't want to do anything for them. It's not that they didn't want to do anything for them. They weren't allowed to.
Yeah, I mean, especially for the triage, I don't think most nurses or medical professionals, a lot of them residents who are who are our age, 20s, mid-20s, who don't have the experience of, say, going abroad to war-filled areas or even just pandemic-filled areas. They're local, they're at home, they're in the area where their friends and family and people they know might be coming to that hospital, and they're having to do this wartime medical practice to save as many lives as they can, but at the same time, it's something that, you know, in a country that we call the greatest country in the world, we're wondering, why don't we have these supplies when we've known about it for so long? You know, I think this generally brings us back to Donald Trump, who I think a major focus in anything that happens in the U.S. right now, especially the problems that arise in the U.S., and how he affects these people. I think recently, because of the pandemic, specifically because of the pandemic, his approval rating, something he cares about, is ridiculously low, like in the 20s or 30s. And people are actually starting to believe and understand that the way he handled the virus was trash. Go on, you're gonna say something.
That bring back Donald Trump. When we were in that like panic time,
Mm-hmm.
when like all the states were sitting there and collecting respirators and whatnot, and you know what's another thing about that? People aren't, at least from my experience with the people on the right side of politics that I come into contact with, like they claim that like we didn't need the respirators, that like we were ending up just like, and it boggles my mind where they get this information.
Yeah.
And then sit there and like I could bring up any point and they're like, that's fake news. I don't understand. Like
I think the time you're referring to was, if I'm correct, it's that time the states were, say, like fighting each other to bid for these ventilators.
Yes, and he ended up just like outbidding them, and then he made like a tweet about it,
Donald Trump.
Donald Trump.
Yes.
He made a tweet about it. Was like, I don't remember the exact words, but it's like, you can't beat the government's funding, or it's some like.
There are two cases at that time. The first was the federal government has a stockpile of masks and equipment that Trump called, or Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, called that's the federal government's supply, not the state government's, which is ridiculous. And two, there was the point where obviously there weren't enough ventilators, and the vendors that sell those ventilators weren't able to provide enough stock, where they had to order it from third parties, like for example China, and other countries that, when selling to the US, whether it's because of their own personal reasons or just general commercial reasons, they had to overlist those prices and even open up bidding wars, where different states were bidding different amounts of money out, trying to outbid each other. Andrew Cuomo was specifically saying they had to pay an upwards of 10, 20 times what ventilators would cost, millions of dollars that could have been saved if they had the right equipment to begin with, just because Trump and other lawmakers were pushing the fact that hospitals weren't over occupied, and it wasn't actually an issue. I know a lot of efforts out there right now have put that problem under wraps, but at the same time, we're still at the point where hospitals are at 100% capacities, over 100% capacities, and states are setting up temporary hospitals, and we're still not at that point where we're peaking in cases.
No, there was instances where they had to get like ice trucks for the bodies because they just didn't have the accommodations for how many people were going, and it's just like crazy.
Yeah.
How like it really, not that all of it could have been avoided, because that's not realistic, but like there was no there's nothing for it. Like people are protesting wearing masks, but like no one's really like protesting that. Like this is really just so amplified because Donald Trump just like really couldn't get his ego in check.
I think that puts it perfectly. His ego.
Yeah, I mean, like the man just really, if it's not about hearing his own voice, it's really he doesn't care. And like I feel, part of me feels bad for like his supporters because they had this idea that like he cares about them. But like it really doesn't seem like that.
I think you have a huge point there. I mean, early on, people, and maybe even myself included, were joking how it's actually Trump's supporters who are going out right now during the coronavirus, and they're going to have the brunt of the effect. But the reality is, they're increasing the problem, and it's still a very sad thing that Trump isn't going out of his way to help these people when just a few like words would save their lives. It's ridiculous.
Like it's crazy because all he really needs to do is basically, because like these supporters are like so diehard for him, right? That like if he was just like calm down for a little bit, they'd probably do it.
Yeah. So we've talked a lot about coronavirus, and I think it's time we do move on. There's so much more to talk about COVID, and we might talk about it in a later podcast episode. But for now, let's move on and talk about a slightly harsher subject about say the oppression of Black people, and let's talk about the Black Lives Matter movement. Okay. So to start out with, there's obviously the news right now. Before they were covering the violent, quote unquote, violent protests, and now they're not covering the peaceful protests that are still happening. They are still happening. These peaceful protests are still going on, protesting at the local and state level to make systematic changes. Systematic in this case, systematic changes across, across the board. So just to get your opinion, what do you think about, the people supporting the Black Lives Matter movement and the people who don't support the Black Lives Matter movement?
This is a weird gray area for me, because
Mm-hmm.
like I'm very, very supportive of Black Lives Matter's movement.
Mm-hmm.
I do feel that some things get blown out of proportion, and not even in not even blown out of proportion. That's not the right phrasing.
Right.
The energy isn't directed at the right instances.
Okay.
Because it was like I'm sorry, but I'm blanking on his name right now. But when they kneeled on his neck, yes, that is a terrible.
Yeah,
terrible
George Floyd.
George Floyd,
Mm-hmm.
yes. That's a terrible, terrible instance of neglect and just being like a terrible cop, right? And we all agreed with that. There wasn't for that particular case. There wasn't like the cops weren't like trying to defend the cops who did it. Like they basically dropped down on everyone that was even there. Like even if they just didn't say anything, right? And we had the riots about that. But then in, I want to say Chicago, or I want to say it was Chicago.
Go on.
There was that event where just like dozens of African Americans lost their lives. If you give me a second, I could specify
Go for
which event.
But while you talk about that, I just want to quickly note that for the people out there, the way that George Floyd died was when the police were arresting him for whatever they were arresting him for, whatever charges that they were trying to pin on him. One of the officers was kneeling on his neck, and repeatedly George Floyd would tell them that he can't breathe. And obviously by not letting up, he suffocated and died. Now, like TJ said, some things might be blown out of proportion, and I think one thing that people obviously aren't talking about is the fact that this is a legitimate way that officers, handle some suspects. I think in this case it was completely unnecessary, when someone who isn't actually resisting and who isn't violent in any way shouldn't have to deal with something so painful and obviously fatal. This is an actual police training that police have to go through, where they actually do kneel on necks quite a bit of the time. And I think obviously the potentially, I think it was 12-week training that police have to go through or something for these kind of things. Like, I don't think their training is nearly enough if these situations pop up.
Yeah, so I confirmed it was Chicago after the once the protest started, gun violence and all sorts of very crazy shenanigans kind of started going on the up, and it's like you see your own people suffering because of this event, but like why is that the kind of response you get, right?
Mm-hmm. More brutality.
They like sitting there hurting their own people, like looting stores, whatnot. Yeah. And I understand this is a frustration that like a lot of people feel right now, but like it's hurting a lot of the people that you're actually looking to like speak for. So it's like counterproductive in my opinion.
There's I kind of agree. I think there's definitely a lot of cases where it is impossible to tell why they're trying to defend something a certain way, or even if they're even trying to defend something. I don't think a lot of these cases are clear enough anyway to the public. But go on, you were saying.
Yeah, I just feel like it was like being handled, and like in no way as this should have ever happened, right? That was just gross neglect.
Right.
But like this was like one of the few times where like the police didn't try and protect them. And that's why I feel like in this case, like the riots weren't as warranted as the other times that like a similar instance occurred.
For the people out there, could you just generally explain what happened in Chicago?
Oh, like after the protest started?
Right.
Okay, so after the protest started, they started off peaceful, I believe, and then there was from my knowledge, there was antagonization from the police. I mean, there were stories of like people just walking to work, minding their own business, getting pepper sprayed.
Right.
There's plenty of videos of like these poor children that just happened to be in the area getting pepper sprayed. I saw this one horrible one where this like 12-year-old girl was like with her parents just like walking the street, and she ended up getting pepper sprayed because she just happened to be by where protesters were. And that's the thing, it's like they all they had to do was nothing and just listen to them protest, right? Like that's really
it's simple.
All you had to do. And like just people kept like even on like a personal level, like around the corner from my house, some very disrespectful person sat there, and during the peaceful protest here where they just marched in the streets.
I recall this, yeah.
Yeah, the one of the people near me sat there and faked, like they reenacted the kneeling scene.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was, and just to like mock these protesters, like
As they were passing by, yeah.
I don't understand, like,
I believe
why.
one of them was also shouting "Black Lives Don't Matter," but that could just be me. But go on.
I didn't hear that, but I mean, it could have happened. I mean, like, to kind of just be that disrespectful, like, and that's like the back to like the prison system,
Mm-hmm.
and back to my point on like how like they stopped viewing them as people just because they went to prison. And don't get me wrong, I mean, like, the things that I've heard George Floyd done,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, to be honest, I don't know what is true and what is not. But for him to still be like on the streets, he clearly wasn't that violent of a criminal,
right?
That he needed to be incarcerated. So like, when I hear that opinion, that like, why are you protesting him? He's not like an ideal member of society. How many people can truly say like they're ideal members of society? You know?
Right. And we definitely can't judge like too hard just because there is an extreme pressure on minorities and African American communities that do actually push them towards situations where they are forced to say forced into theft or forced into situations where in poverty, where you have to make decisions that are not lawful or ideal, but that whether it's drugs or theft or I think in George Floyd's case it was robbery that he was sentenced to jail for, but he was out of jail. A lot of these times, like whether it's the reform system, whether it's the fact that they know they cannot go back to that life or whatever, they've dealt with it and they understood why they were pushed there to begin with. But I'm just making a note that a lot of this is it's because of the environment that they're in.
One point I did want to bring up is the all lives matter.
Okay, yeah, let's talk about that.
So like this has me a little torn, because like if you look into the statistics of like, people across the U.S. murdered by cops, right?
Right.
A lot of it looks statistically correct.
Sure.
And I mean, like, I don't respect saying all lives matter as a response to Black Lives Matter, but the thing that aggravates me about it is that like this is like a movement for the U.S., right?
What?
Like this isn't like
the all lives matter
change. Yes, like even like Black Lives Matter, because like they're Black lives, but they're American lives, right?
Yes.
They're
so like what I would say is that the Black Lives Matter movement, whether intentionally or not, is actually advocating for the entirety of the U.S. and minority groups who not only face things like over-policing, but more importantly, oppression and the environmental factors that affect or even were meant to affect Black people also affect people who are in poverty, and they should be advocating for America as a whole. But if I'm correct, I believe the All Lives Matter movement originally started as a response to the Black Lives Matter movement, and was primarily used by the alt-right, and started off as a form of white supremacy.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't hear that.
So although you'll hear people, touting that all lives matter, the reality is the only time that it's brought up ever is in response to the Black Lives Matter movement. You don't hear the argument all lives matter in terms of helping Black Lives Matter or Black people, or actually advocating for anything to help people. It's just the response, not the advocacy.
Yeah. No, and that was where I wanted to get to, is that it's not that I'm offended, but
right.
that because now knowing that was part of
the
All Lives Matter,
yeah.
I can kind of see it more, but the police isn't. I mean, there are specific racist.
I will mention that there is a movement called Blue Lives Matter for the police.
Interesting.
And that's also a potentially oppressive movement. It started off as a very innocent movement, but right now it's insane. Right now it's being used as an argument for the police brutality that the protesters have been facing.
Wait, like defending the police brutality?
So
see that's one thing that's crazy about the police, is that they have mob mentality all the time. No matter what.
Yeah.
And that's there's so many instances where cops that want to do the right thing just don't, because they'll be isolated.
They'll be fired. They'll be ostracized. They'll be
even if they're not fired, they're literally shunned in their own group. So literally it could. I've heard many cases where it turns violent.
Yeah.
Because they sat there, they ratted out someone's buddy, the group of friends end up attacking that person.
Pretty much.
So it's so difficult to reform the police.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, clearly needs to be done, because clearly what I was trying to get to is the police are just not really trained to not kill people in a lot of instances.
Very true.
Because
a lot of it's just trained to kill. Yeah.
Yeah. Because you gotta even think about their fire training. It's aimed for the chest. Because and I understand. Part of me understands why they're trained that way, but this is more of a domestic situation where things really don't have to. But there is the part that makes this difficult, because even though not everyone is that violent person,
mm-hmm.
right? I'm sure some cops have had that experience, and
oh no, yeah, definitely.
That has to change you.
So
right?
So going on to this point, because this is a major point, with especially the recent protests, the police, for example, their training, and the overall mentality that they have once they pass the academy and they go onto the field, a lot of the times it's to look at everyone as potential criminals or suspects, and when they're called to something, whether it's a dispute or just a safety concern, a lot of the times they come out with their gun. They come out with the potential the potential caution or over caution that might end up having these African Americans killed. Obviously there's a huge problem with over policing and stop and frisk, and the manipulation of warrants to search people and find, quote unquote, where there's obvious cases of planting drugs by the police. But to talk about the responsibilities of the police once they're called somewhere, a lot of the times it's for cases for something related to mental illness, for something related to some racist calling the police on a black individual, and a lot of the times non-violent cases that do not require a violent solution.
No, mean, this is what didn't happen to an African American family, but there was this father who sat there, and his son was autistic, and I think he was being pulled over for a standard traffic violation, like speeding.
Right.
But all the noise and stuff, right, would be like a trigger for his son.
Right.
So he was just trying to get home, or I forget if he said it was home, or he was just trying to get somewhere to basically drop off his child. And I believe this was Arizona. They ended up chasing him down. It turned into like a chase, right? And they ended up, I think, pumping 18 rounds into the side of his car. I believe they killed the child. And then the dad was in critical condition. But for speeding, you unload 18 rounds into a car. It's insane. How do you even begin to believe that that's a right?
Some definitely, obviously, push the idea that there's a huge culture of power in the police and in control, as well as the what's it called? The immunity that they received. There's a specific term for it. It'll come to me eventually, but where anything that they do, if they claim that their life was in danger, however they claim it, it won't be investigated. That kind of mentality ends up giving these situations to rise, where the overuse of force, much less the insane logic behind the sequence of events, come to fruition.
No, and one thing I don't understand is as society, right? We're so far into society, and still people have a hard time accepting responsibility for your actions. Like this is something that if you just we're okay, yeah, we did this. This is terrible.
Right.
Here are our steps to make sure it doesn't happen again.
That's reasonable.
That it's not a hard concept. Even in my day to day, I'm crap, I did this wrong. Let's do it this way this time. And of course, there's gonna be hiccups, but just to sit stagnant while these issues keep coming up is just so irresponsible.
Very true.
As an organization.
So, I think we should talk a little bit about the police, in terms of, say, the past and the future. So just a little bit about the past. I think it's prudent to mention, especially because I think it's not mentioned too often, that the police or policing in the U.S., or let's say America, not the U.S., originally started, in the policing of slaves, and specifically black people, throughout the beginning of the police, where it started off as slave patrols, where they'd catch slaves, and that culture is stayed. The culture behind policing black people, and I'd even say throughout our government, the government policy behind treating black people is constantly, it's been divergent, subterfuge. It's just telling people, hey, you're equal, but doing things that are completely opposite of that. And obviously in our history throughout, say, the 1900s, there's been ridiculous accounts that you'd almost think are unbelievable, whether it's bombing black churches or just killing a lot of black people and getting away with it, to things like the KKK, like that's still a thing. The fact that that's an actual organization right now still, and it's not claimed a terrorist organization. The fact that, in history there's been laws after laws, policies put in place that just limit the ability for black people to get jobs, education, get the right resources, and constantly pushes them towards over policing. It's a history full of oppression. And I think now there's the protests have brought forth the movement for their two slogans. One is defund the police, and the other is abolish the police. Do you know these two?
I've heard them, and I mean, I kind of agree with the defund the police. I mean, there's a lot of things that like their pensions are almost guaranteed, basically, and they're like pretty ridiculous pensions.
Right.
But like, it's just so difficult to not be a part of defund the police, because it's like
what's your understanding of defund the police?
So from my understanding of defund the police, they want to sit there and basically take away a lot of like government financing, mm-hmm. For the police station. So like and I don't know a whole lot, but I heard something about like getting rid of like quotas, okay, as part of it. Not so much that's like directly in line with defunding, but like as a institutional change, getting rid of like quotas so that like people, like cops, aren't like specifically
forced to arrest. Yeah, they're going out of their way to arrest people.
Yeah, no, mm-hmm. I mean, like, you can even with like things like getting like speeding tickets and stuff, where like there's certain times of the month where police are specifically more active because right. they're trying to make their quotas, and like it causes so much distrust between the police and like the average day citizen. Yeah, right? Because like it's literally not a situation where they're preventing crime. They're literally going out looking for any excuse they can to just basically be able to claim that they did their job. Right. Right. But like defunding the police is a lot of just basically cutting a lot of like the exclusive benefits of being a police officer. So I'm just going to explain from what I understand and what the movement's all about. So defund the police is yes, it is about as the name suggests, defunding the police, removing a lot of the government funding that the police gets. But the idea behind it is that so the police generally respond to every dispute that 911 gets. 911 is the emergency number that you'd call, whether it's for a medical emergency or a violent emergency or a non-violent emergency. And generally the police, whether starting from the operator directly to the patrol cars, will respond to everything. And the idea behind defund the police is that a huge chunk, even I would say a majority of cases that are called to 911 and that potentially end up in these police's hands don't require a violent solution or even a gun trained professional. They don't require a gun at the situation to begin with. And the idea behind defund the police is they want to stop overfunding the police, where giving them all the responsibilities of handling all these situations like mental health, like nonviolent disputes, and instead giving that funding to
organizations and government organizations that can actually handle these situations, like mental health experts sent to a situation where a mental health expert is required and not a police officer pointing a gun at a mentally ill patient. And a lot of these cases where people are over policed or they die because a police officer is not actually trained to deal with that situation would not only be avoided, it would also be a better source of funding when the reality is our police systems are stressed with the insane amount of calls and situations that they have to deal with, when you'd normally think, like when you look at cop shows, when you think about cops in general, you think they're out solving crimes, you think they're out gathering like suspects and evidence, and but the reality is they're doing things like patrols, they're answering 911 calls, and they're dealing with traffic stops and tickets, which are worldly different from the average serial killer that you're trying to catch. And going out with the mentality of, hey, anyone can be a killer or you're always in danger, to some place that doesn't require that mentality. To defund the police, is the idea is to take that funding away from the police, where the police don't need the funding, and only give them the funding that they need, and instead put the rest of the funding towards systems that would truly benefit, like social welfare programs, city and education programs, mental health programs, as well as experts, say within the emergencies, and emergency operators and their system to actually respond to these situations. So it is a huge part of it is definitely to remove the funding, but a lot of it's actually just to use the funding elsewhere.
I did hear that they wanted to add more specialized branches, and they basically that way, like they split up the responsibility.
Right.
Because there is a valid point that all of this stuff is a lot to put on one specific individual.
Right.
So I do feel that adding in specialization into the institution where there's different organizations, and I'd imagine if we implement these, that there'd be a separate number besides 911, so you could get a more specific response, right, to whatever the problem
or even still keeping it 911 to make it easier, but the reality is that the situation needs to be dealt with by the operators and handed out to the right people. But I definitely think that while the movement for defund the police might not be perfect, it does raise the right questions. Why are police dealing with these problems? Why are police still violently dealing with these problems? And maybe it's because of their training. Maybe it's because the fact that they could at any point be in danger. But the reality is that there needs to be a fix that involves funding the right systems, that involves dealing with the situations correctly, and defund the police definitely brings that to light. What do you know about the movement for abolish the police?
I don't know 100%. Mm-hmm. I'm assuming that the base idea is that they just want to get rid of the police.
You're not wrong. You're not wrong.
Which is incredibly stupid. Because then what was that town in Seattle that sat there and abolished the police, and then they like tried to become like basically their own separate state essentially, and didn't realize that they basically, if they're not a part of the state, that they're not getting things like food, water, kind of like, because they basically claimed independence from the U.S.
I don't know the specific case, but
give me 1 second.
Sure. But while you're on that, just for the people out there, so from my understanding, abolish the police generally references two things. One, it has as the name suggests, they want to abolish the police. And
Dion.
Go on.
Oh, sorry. No, you finish it.
And a lot of it tends to go back to the form that police departments, and I knew I'd remember it now, qualified immunity, which is essentially the police officers getting away with anything. Like that needs to be completely transformed. The police and the police departments and the policing in general needs to be completely transformed. Yes, we have law enforcement, we have FBI, we have CIA, we have Homeland, we have Department of Defense, we have a lot out there in terms of agents and law enforcement that deal with serious crimes. But going back to a system like, say, the sheriff system or localized policing efforts, they tend to handle things a little bit more differently than your average police department, especially like city police departments, with the amount of control that they have. And obviously maybe it's not the greatest idea, and it's definitely not perfect, but abolish the police is essentially saying we need to completely transform our idea of what the police is and does. So similar to defund the police, in where we try to focus on the right institutions that can help us. Abolish the police is simply, in a simple way, is trying to push for reform and change and major transformation, so that the police or policing that can truly help people, which is to catch criminals and serious crime and even potentially stop crime, is focused on that, and not the way it is now, focusing on, say, stop and frisk, mandatory, something mandatory where the police are given the objective to look for drugs on people, and target groups of people, which is terrifying if you're an individual that has to go through this almost daily, and you're fearing for your life, where if they find something, then definitely, but if they don't, you could be targeted, you could have evidence planted on you, and once you're in the system, they don't let you go.
That's an interesting point, the planted evidence.
Yeah.
Because I forget where I got the information off the top of my head, but they did, like, there was a couple of YouTubers that basically were showing what, like, borders were like.
Okay.
Like, basically, like, border cops.
Right.
And that, like, basically they were bringing up this point that, like, they saw, like, this cop doing this hand sign, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was in line with the drug dogs, like, reactions.
I see.
Right? And it brought up this point that, like, sure, we could train animals to sniff out drugs, but we can also train them to respond to hand signals.
Right.
Right? And not that every drug cop and drug dog are some crazy duo that are like sitting there systematically arresting people, but it
exists.
Is a system that allows that to happen. Yeah.
Yes. I definitely think first there's a lot of debate behind canines and the drug sniffing units, especially when it comes down to like their reactions and the arbitrary, judgment behind those reactions. But especially in cases with, planting evidence and, forcing someone to submit to a search, and then even planting evidence after that search, it's compounding evidence that was all, fabricated. These situations, they're inevitable in a system that leaves these people unchecked.
Yeah. I literally I believe the whole thing about it wasn't so much that like this particular case he was planting drugs,
right,
or anything. Is basically that the border patrols were, or not patrols, but the like border police were basically sitting there and just like, if they had a problem with anyone, or if they sat there and like just kind of felt like that was the person they wanted to target,
yeah,
that they could sit there and search them,
yep,
because of the dog's reaction.
Yep.
And even if they weren't doing anything, they caused them a huge hassle, wasted time of their life. But like the thing is that they were like basically trying to use it to catch people that had drugs, but like they basically weren't doing that. They like weren't really catching a significant amount of people with drugs crossing. They
were creating.
This is more like domestic
right.
borders, like Texas to be honest, I'm terrible at geography, so I don't know. I think like New Mexico is attached, but like basically they were just like doing it just to sit there and kind of like ruin someone's life and get
out
them
of spite,
into the system.
Out of oppression, out of targeting.
Whatever the reasons seem to be, it's just like, I mean, it has like no basis or anything.
And I definitely think that in the end, I guess this does actually bring us back to the prison system. I don't think that I think that because of a lot of the cases that are coming to light now, where body cam footage actually reveals planting of evidence, where there's a clear correlation between the environmental factors of like stop and frisk and extreme policing lead to those drug cases and whatnot, and especially when it comes down to things like having police officers who are, say, trained to see threats, or for whatever justification that they give. Some of them are just pure racists, so there is no justification that they will kill an individual for suspecting drugs or suspecting criminal history, sometimes even having the wrong guy.
No, oh god, that's like the biggest like FU to the rest of society as a police, as like the police just being like, oops, we had the wrong place or whatever. That, like, how do you make such a decisive like action against something you weren't even that sure about?
Okay, you ready?
Give me 5 seconds. Okay, I'm back.
Okay. So you can just continue.
Where were we? I cut my.
I'll just continue this.
Okay.
So, like, generally, I don't think the policing efforts have been up to par, but there's definitely been a proven case of over policing and oppression of African Americans, and obviously the whatever judicial remedies that they need to deal with these situations have also been dampened. I don't think they have, the resources, much less the help from the government, the support that every human deserves from the government to actually deal with this form of racism when it comes from a cop. I think, these movements, these protests, the fact that they're finally, I can't even say they're gaining light, because the peaceful protests are not gaining media attention. They're not. Some of them are obviously, taking effect. Some police departments are putting bans on chokeholds and asphyxiation related practices. Some of them are putting major forms of reform in their system, like originally there was the body cam laws. Now there's banning chokeholds and taking a knee on individuals' necks, but it's not enough.
I can't believe that that's like a thing, because that's not like a trained thing.
I've seen it quite a bit.
I've seen it quite
so
a bit,
much,
yes.
And for individuals to, I don't know.
I don't believe that's part of their training.
I personally think that it might be, just based off the fact that it seems like they do it so
frequently.
They do it so like in a very systematic way, that to pin down an individual in such a painful way to make sure they do not move. But obviously, just the thought of, someone arguing back at you and you telling them that because you're arguing back at a cop, they're resisting, and that they potentially deserve to be violently treated like that, doesn't make sense to me.
No, and I never understood that. Like, I get, like, in those videos, right, you see with, like, people just interacting with the cops, there's a lot of them that, like, aren't really escalated violently. It just seems like a situation where two people are just being really stubborn. It's almost like
TJ, so much.
But I mean, like, I just don't understand, like, what brings you to, like, it almost feels like the police have, like, a total separate view of the rest of the world.
Right.
Like I couldn't imagine kneeling on someone's neck, like, even for, like, a second. It make me uncomfortable to my bone.
And obviously this is coming from someone who's been in the martial arts and the fighting realm for a bit, but
no, that's, I mean, like, that wouldn't fly there. I mean, like,
exactly.
there's certain holds, but, like, not crazy. Like, everything was so thought out with, like, if you do it, like, any other way, you kind of, I mean, you get points taken off and stuff. I mean, there's, like, punishments for it,
right?
Not doing it properly. But, like, it's just crazy how, like, watching that video and, like, him just, like, kind of looking like it's like any casual day.
Yeah, that pissed me off.
I just couldn't.
I think this definitely makes us or brings us to bring up the point or to bring up the case actually of Rayshard Brooks. He was the one who fell asleep at the Wendy's drive-thru.
I hate that we have to describe it as like he was the one that.
Yeah, I apologize. That you're right. Actually, I don't want to describe it like that, but people don't know the story,
yeah.
and
no, but there's so many, especially currently, that like it's not even like you being incorrect about it. It's just that it's hard to keep track of everyone.
In his case, in his case, especially what's pertinent here is that this poor individual was drunk. Physically not moving his car, he wasn't driving it, and
was his car turned on?
I I don't know, but yeah, I understand that if it was turned on, it's technically him driving it, but that's a case for something else here. But in his case, he stepped out of the car. He's having a conversation with the police officer, and you hear this conversation. That's quite fine actually, and everything's going well. Suddenly turn, sour when the police officer is trying to take him in. And normally something like this, you just get a fine. You wouldn't be taken in. You would actually just be escorted back home and not arrested. Something that turned into, hey, you're drunk. We should probably take you home, or you're definitely not safe to drive, which you haven't been. It turned into, hey, we're gonna have to take you in. Stop resisting arrest. And Richard Brooks runs. There's obviously the case where he took the taser from the man, and while he was running, he shot backwards, which in my opinion, I know a lot of people will argue that that's dangerous and it is potentially a reason for him to be shot. I disagree completely. I think the man was drunk, and I think personally, even if he wasn't drunk, the police to begin with should have a system in place, or a training in place where running a drunk man down is the protocol and not shooting him in the back.
See, the thing about that is that, like, the police knew it was a taser, right? There's no, like,
yeah,
because it was theirs, right? So
tasers are limited, by the way. They limited range.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Not even just that.
But go on.
That, right? There's several cops on this suspect, right? And they know it's a taser. They know it's a non-lethal weapon, right? And to pull a lethal weapon on it, like, that is just absolutely disgusting. Like, and it's not even like I could understand, like, the fear if you've never been tased before, right? And you're like, you don't know what to expect. But, like, cops are tased and pepper sprayed as a part so that they don't basically do this.
And they know how bad it is. And the reality is, getting shot is not a response. It just isn't.
I mean, like, you had all the information to, like, this isn't something you could claim, like, you didn't know or that my life was in danger. Like, this was a very clear incident that, like, the cops just basically figured this is how they wanted to do it.
Right. I obviously, again, think there's another case that we should talk about, which this one really, cut deep. This one's about Brianna Taylor.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
That's
so
actually in my opinion, not that any of them are any less bad than the others, but this one definitely is, like, just a what the F moment.
So this is something that there's still conflicting accounts as to, like, what happened in terms of, like, why she died. I'll go over, like, two specific accounts that are separate from the main point of the story, but the main point of the story is the police, they come to Brianna Taylor's house with a warrant for someone else or something else, essentially not her, and they go into the house, and after an exchange, they have a shoot off, they shoot, and Brianna Taylor gets shot multiple times and dies in bed while she's asleep, and it's ridiculous. It's definitely, there's no excuse, and more importantly, we need to find out exactly why everything went so terribly. And so the two accounts that I want to put out there that there's a lot of evidence for both of them, and they're not conflicting accounts. They're two specific things. The first is that Brianna Taylor was with her boyfriend. I forget his name. His last name was Walker, I think. And he had a gun. And when police, who broke into the house, entered the house, he pulled out his gun. And I forget if he shot. He might have shot. But the reality is they were in his home. They were trespassing. And he had a gun. Whether it's because of this gun that the police shot, I don't know. Whether it's because it was the man in particular that the police shot, I don't know. The reality is, Brianna Taylor was shot and died. And it's ridiculous that they entered the house to begin with and shot and killed someone who was so innocent. The second account is that there's so much increasing evidence for this, but I hate to think that something so despicable is going on. There's a case for the city's gentrification, in which gentrification is where major corporations and businesses essentially want to, I would say, monopolize an area, take over an area where there was previously small businesses or a residential area, and turn them into their complex or their business area of their own. And a lot of the times the argument is that it'll help the people in the surrounding areas. So in this case, what the case is for gentrification in this case is, apparently there was a push for gentrification in that specific residential area, and one of the based off like the council and getting the actual warrant, there was a push that Brianna Taylor's boyfriend was actually doing drugs, and that house was a place that drugs existed because of that, and that was a reason for a warrant. And there's the case that's linked to the gentrification of that area to prevent him from living there, to say that that's a potential drug house, and put forth the idea that they don't deserve to live there, so that once they move, gentrification can happen. And I hate to think that would be the case, and I really hope it isn't. But even if it isn't, it's still ridiculous that a no-knock warrant into someone's house could kill someone who's asleep.
No, and that's the thing, right? Like,
yeah,
she's asleep. No matter how you look at it, like, she's not a threat. Like, you had the jump on them. So even if, like, she happened to be some, like, drug lord,
right,
which is very clearly not true. Like, there is no reason to shoot.
Especially if she's asleep. It's just...
It's just... I don't know. It just irks me so hard that, like, anyone...
This is in the middle of the night. The door bursts in, and the boyfriend, obviously wary of whatever the hell's going on, has a gun to protect himself.
Yeah,
it's insane.
It's insane that, like, you sit there and even if, like how do you justify shooting someone that's asleep?
Yeah.
Like, it's actually, like, just, like, the most, like, disgusting thing I've heard during this entire and extravagant series of events.
Yeah.
Like, it is just, I don't know, if anyone asked me, like, when I was a kid, if I thought that, like, this was how the future was gonna be, I would have said no, because like I mean like at least on like a personal level, I mean like I grew up in a very diverse area. There was no really like racial issues growing up, but then like as I got older and older, just like more and more, and I don't know if that's really like because media's just like capturing it more,
Right.
or if it's like the entire time it was like this, and now because media is capturing it more, like people are being put on the chopping block, right?
This without body cams. The body cams weren't like a forced thing. They weren't even a thing up until recently. Like,
no, and it's crazy to think how many cases, if it was still like this back then, before cams, before social media, right? Like how many cases just go unreported? That it's just like whatever the cop said it was.
It's
is what happened.
It's such a dark side of history, and to forget history, the present. And personally, I believe there's definitely a lot of cases, if not a huge number of cases, that will go unreported, that will be misreported by the police. Things like body cam footage don't even come to light till years later sometimes, or until a police officer outs the footage and then gets fired for outing the footage. It's a constant form of keeping the news under wraps and under the rug, especially in I believe in Brianna Taylor's case. The police report for that case initially said that no one was injured and no shots were fired. Can you believe that?
That's actually insane.
Like until a while after. And I don't know if there was a reason for that, so it can pass through certain loopholes. I don't know if it was just a huge mistake. I don't know how you can go ahead and kill someone, then make a mistake in reporting it. It's insane. And I think this insanity should bring us to our potentially the final topic of this, which is sad to say, it might be even sadder. And so I'll start with a specific case, and we'll go on to the overall picture. There was a case recently on the 4th of July in Indiana where a black man who was I forget if he was on like private property or not, but he and his friends were there to like at a lake to see or on the 4th of July to see the lunar eclipse, but they were essentially accosted by a few individuals, and essentially they tried to lynch him in the forest, and essentially he says they pinned him to a tree. They said they told one of them to go get a noose, and I cannot tell you whether they would have lynched him. I saw blood in their eyes. I'm sure they would have hurt him very badly, and they probably would have gone ahead with it if his friends weren't there, forced like recording and trying to help and whatnot. And like it really hurts me deep down when this guy's an activist. He this individual, and he's confident enough. He's not confident. He's brave enough to talk about the fact that he was almost lynched, and so many people would not have talked about it. They wouldn't have come forward, and lynching is actually a thing that still goes on. And I hate to think that lynching would happen and it would go under wraps and people wouldn't cover it, and even it would be quote unquote labeled or misclassified as a suicide. This actually happened on video, and it's insane. It's just insane.
I mean, I know of the story.
Right.
Or I don't know if story is really the right way to describe, but I know of the instance.
Right.
I don't have a lot, but it's just disgusting. It's weird because you go through school these days, right? And they teach you, they're like, oh yeah, it's over, but it definitely doesn't feel like the whole civil rights movement is over, because it's there's just so many parts, and I mean they even things to where African American communities where they specifically sit there and basically put them in a low income area and just kind of build other I think the specific instance I'm talking about is Purdue Chicken. I could be wrong. It is one of those companies, but basically what they do is they have they have several instances where their butcheries and factories are near African American.
I know exactly what you're saying. Yeah, I hear you.
And basically they're just general day-to-day pollution, whatever. Their byproducts just cause horrible smells, whatever, and actually cause problems with the water systems there. And just a whole plethora of issues that people don't need to deal with on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
But until these instances started coming up, that was always what I viewed as modern day racism.
Yeah.
But it's hard to even say that that's where it stops, because it's just it seems that almost every sector of any high powered situation or a high powered
authority or capitalism.
Thank you. It's just there's always people controlling. I mean, just this year alone, we had the pedophile ring,
Agreed.
all these different hate crimes, all these different protests.
Whether it's from places of authority to the rich to the influential.
Yeah, and it just seems we just can't really get together and just feel each other are human, right? And I don't get it. I really don't get why we can't just get along.
There's a lot of distrust right now with these authorities, with places of influence. When I think in California there was a case, a recent case last month where, especially during the protests, there was a black man who was found hanging from a tree, and the police department or the sheriff's department immediately ruled it a suicide, and people were just the F, what's wrong with you? Do an actual investigation. Do you not understand the times we're living in? Are you actually going to ignore what the people are talking about, what's happening? And I believe they did a full investigation, and I believe they ended up concluding that it was still a suicide. But one thing that really stuck with me was a quote where the individual, I think it was a sheriff or someone, I'll read out the quote. Essentially the coroner's report said that there was no evidence of trauma that suggests others were involved, and the report also said this, coupled with the existence of evidence of prior suicidal ideations and a history of mental health issues, support that the conclusion of suicide. Now, to me, I get it. If an individual has mental health issues and and whatnot, it definitely should be considered, a factor. I don't personally believe that, an investigation solely based off the body alone is enough when you find an individual dead, when, you have to go through hundreds of hours of questioning just to find out what happened in a day. And this is not me saying that their investigation was bad. I'm just saying initially they ruled it a suicide, and that's what I have a problem with, when the reality is they needed to investigate it.
Yeah, and I mean that is a. I mean, I do agree with you. And not to say that cops have like a third eye or anything, but
Right.
part of me is like the proper protocol is to do that, right? To investigate no matter what your assumption is. But I guess not that I agree with this, but you could look at it as these people have experienced this,
Right.
and the signs led to that. Not that really, no matter what, you should still investigate, because how many times has someone sat there and made a murder look like a suicide?
Exactly. You can't just assume.
So, to not investigate at all is disgusting. But, I sort of can, not really, but can see, why they wouldn't, but still, you investigate.
To me, I think
people only get smarter, right? So,
Right.
a person that has the ability to, basically do that to someone, they're gonna figure out a way to not get caught.
how to get away with murder. Yeah.
Yeah, there's so many things that, people are always like, oh, you can't break into that, and then you can't do this, you can't do that, and then some guy randomly down the line just does it.
Yeah.
Right?
So in this case, I think there was a lot of public outrage, which made them go back into a complete investigation. But yeah, I truly believe that if you find someone hanging from a tree in a public area, especially in public, you have to investigate it, especially when it was out. It was in a tree. It was on a tree.
Or I meant I guess my interpretation of public, a public park.
I don't recall. But as far as I understand, when you're out in the open, and I don't want to say if a white man was hanging from a tree like that, it'd be different. But I'm just trying to say that even in the end, after the investigation, using the argument behind because he had a history of mental illness, we're going to conclude that it was a suicide. That mentality was clearly, an influence, and especially when they initially ruled it a suicide, I'm sure they had that same mentality. I'm not sure what sort of investigations they did at the end, but they refused to do the investigation that was at least necessary for the public to appreciate them. So they, which is their job to a degree.
Yeah. I don't know. It is kind of disgusting. I don't know. It feels like, I don't know. Especially mental health in particular seems to be a weird area for the police.
Right.
They really just don't know how to handle it, at all.
So true.
I can't recall any, and not see that's a weird thing, because it's does everyone report every instance, right? Even if it ended well. So I can't say that they never treat it, but at least it seems like a majority of the time, they handle it with kind of just a very irrational, or
a brute force kind of way.
Yeah, it's kind of they're like kind of like trying to like force people to be okay, right?
Yeah,
and
I understand what that means. Yeah.
And I mean, like I just don't understand, right? Like why is it so hard to just like be like a person to a person, right? Like, but like I don't know, it just seems like that's really their like go-to response for everything.
Yeah.
there were
Jeez.
Not that this is directly associated, but it's on the topic of mental health. I don't remember if it was this year or it was like it could have been up to like 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
There was the man who was like I think he was like trying to jump off a bridge or something,
Okay.
and he ended up getting like the cops shot him to stop him from like jumping off the bridge. When was that? Let me, because I need to.
Jeez, I feel like I know what you're talking about. Is that not that might? The thing is, like, even if it wasn't recent, it might have been brought up recently to bring light to the issue. But like that kind of like mentality, even I understand that some people would say that you're shooting them to disable them, or prevent them from doing what they're doing, but the kind of judgment you'd need to explain it to yourself that yes, shooting this person who's about to jump off is a good thing. That kind of judgment, I don't know where it comes from.
Yeah, I just oh god, right now I'm not seeing the one that I was referring to, because apparently right now, at least the first 2 pages of Google so far is about this axe-wielding man doing suicide by that's from 2017.
Okay.
And then, yeah, but no, it's just crazy, like. But like there are also like crazy situations, like suicide by cop. That has to be a horrible
True
situation. Oh my god, I couldn't imagine. There's people that like run at the cops and basically force them to do it, and that's like the thing that like no one brings up into this, is that like there's literally people that like they just want out so bad,
right,
that they like basically force cops to do it. But there's also like random instances where the cop is just like not handling it right.
And obviously, like for anyone listening still at the end of this video, like we're not saying cops are bad people in general, and they still do their job a lot of the times, and their job is necessary a lot of the times. But the focus that we have is the system that allows cops to do such horrible acts and get away with it. It's not about the good that the cops actually do. In fact, everyone in the Black Lives Matter community, in the movement, in the people who are arguing for the case of like reform, they're not focusing on changing the good. In fact, it's about increasing the good that everyone wants, which is safety and not being targeted. So
I think that has a lot to do with like patriarchy or
patriotism.
Yes, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Sorry.
That's a topic
because it's
for
so
another
it's so,
podcast.
Yeah, true.
We will cover that.
Gotcha.
Patriotism, yeah. And I think another journalist said this better than me, but the difference between an like nationalistic. Not this wasn't a journalist. This was the congresswoman. But the difference between an over nationalistic approach and ideology and true patriotism. One true patriotism, one even arguing for change that is bettering, the nation, versus the nationalistic ideology that we're already good, nothing needs to change, and in fact needs to get more towards what we're doing.
That's a very valid point.
Yeah.
That like literally, like I don't understand that mentality of like just saying that we're fine as we are, right? Because isn't that like why would you? How could you even believe for a second that anything is perfect, right? Like there's always room for improvement.
I still think just the idea behind quoting the Constitution and hiding behind the Constitution is a way for people to justify what they're doing as patriotic, when the reality is, whether it's current forms of laws and policies or just overall systemic oppression, the Constitution doesn't reflect it, the reality.
Yeah, part of that, it almost feels like even though we're taught about the Constitution, it feels like no one really knows what's on the Constitution.
I'll agree to that.
Because like there is a part, how we have like shirts with like flags on it.
Yes.
Right? And I believe in the original like writing, right? You're not supposed to have any like article of clothing.
True.
Have the flag on it.
You can't promote.
Stuff,
you can't promote it. Yeah.
You can't. There was like just like a bunch of things that like are like the like stereotypical like
you can't
go
step on
guy.
the flag and have it on the floor. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It has to be folded a specific way.
Yeah.
Just all these things like that like people kind of like ignore,
right?
But then claim that they're patriotic because they wear it on their
exactly
shirt, right?
Exactly.
Like, I don't know. It's a like self-destructive mentality, in my opinion.
Yeah, I understand also the idea behind like a lot of those sayings, but I'm not going to argue whether they're right or wrong to allow the American flag as a design on articles of clothing or whatever. But it's clear that the people arguing for their patriotism, and the reflection that they believe in the Constitution don't actually understand the Constitution as well as they
claim to.
But yeah, we'll definitely talk more, TJ. We'll focus on some different issues next time, and we'll definitely bring back a few references to this episode. But thanks for joining, and I really appreciate you spending the 2+ hours that we've been talking.
Oh, anytime, Joey.
Yeah. So if you guys have stuck around this long, thank you. Thank you all for watching. This is our first episode of the News and Review podcast by Weekly Reviewer. I'm Joey, or Mahim, and thanks for watching, and peace.